All right, so wouldn't be a discussion of blackness within the context of the US without mentioning the one drop rule, but I'm gonna assume y'all already got the basics and try and take it a step further this time. So, by the late 1700s, so like 250 years ago, there were numerous slaves of majority Euro descent. The children of Sally Hemings, for example, who was enslaved by Thomas Jefferson, were 7/8 of Euro descent. So presumably 1/8 or 12.5% Afro descent. Jefferson granted his children freedom as adults and they assimilated into white society. So the average person with their ancestry would have still been enslaved at this time. And when they say assimilate, it could mean that given their ancestry, they could still have visible signs being of Afro descent, which they might have had to hide. You know, it could have been something like trying to stay out of the sun and avoid from tanning, trying to keep their hair straight, stuff like that to kind of like camouflage any sign that could have given them away. Or they could have been born a complexion where that never would have been necessary, where they would have looked as if they were completely of Euro descent, and yet still would have lived their entire life enslaved. And it wouldn't have mattered what they looked like because people knew their ancestry. So the key there is not that you do something like Doctor Who and you come out in a completely new body and you look like a totally different person and then you're able to assimilate into this other culture. It's that you're able to assimilate looking the way you do as the same person in the same body because culturally you're acting different. Because maybe you're wearing different clothes, you're talking different, you're moving different, because you're moving from one ethnic group to another. In the 1900s, under influences of eugenics and racial discrimination, states enacted laws classifying people as Black who had any traceable evidence or perception of any African ancestry. So laws were passed in multiple states in the early 1900s, long after the end of slavery, to define white and Black under the associated laws for segregation. There were other states that retained their existing blood fraction statutes and amended them to specify that 1/16 or 1/32, whichever was the case per state, was the equivalent of one drop. So 1/16 is 6%. 1/32 is 3%. But then from what I'm hearing, you get people who will take these DNA tests and get like 1 or 2%. And then try and be like, oh yeah, I'm Black, I've been oppressed, and claim this just out of nowhere, when they literally have less percent than what was legally considered the cutoff point back in the day when things were like, why are those not the people we're referring to when we talk about one drop-in? Why is it people who are actually born and raised into a community who have visible features, who have immediate family members, and not the people who never suspected a thing until they took one of these genotyping tests? Okay, so everything we looked at so far was based on ancestry or phenotype, and now we're going to look at some stuff based off of genotyping data, which is not a perfect alignment with ancestry or phenotype, but it's enough to give us a pretty good picture. So there's this graph based on 23andMe customers where it shows that once you get to the 50-50 line and you start to go toward less Afro ancestry and more Euro ancestry, it's like a diagonal line in how people self-identify. Where you've got the people who are closest to that 50-50 mark, the people who have 25% or more, are going to make up the majority of the people on under 50%. And then the people under 25% down to like 10% are a minority. That's maybe like, if I'm reading this correctly, that's like 20% of the customers who had this genetic makeup who identify as Black. So when they say 3 or 6% is what was legally considered one drop, there's like only trace, the line at that part of the graph is a sliver. So for anyone who wants to say like, these people who still choose to identify as Black, who have less than whatever your personal idea of where the cutoff should be is, because there's definitely not a consensus, right? Wherever that line is, people who are around 12 to 15% still identify as Black. For some people, that's the one drop rule. For some people, it's the ones around 25%. For some people, it's anything less than 50%. And yet, the actual one drop line was all the way back there under 10%, which pretty much nobody is doing, okay? If people with so little Afro ancestry showing up on the test still choose to identify as Black, they are also a minority of the people who test the same as them with similar genetic makeup. And if you take that entire group, that entire under 50% group, that is 1% of the African American community. So what are we even talking about? Like some of y'all know who Precious is. I've shared stuff with her in the past. She just turned 90 a few months ago, and she'll tell me when she was a child, her father, who looked like white as white, like blonde hair, blue eyes, spoke to a white woman, and the town was ready to lynch them, like the entire family. Like her mother, her sisters had to pack up and move across the country to escape getting lynched because her pale white father looked at a white woman less than a century ago. So look where we're at today. At the point where people who are damn near 50% Afro descent can still choose to identify as white. So as this graph shows, once you get to people who have less than 25% Afro ancestry, less than half of them are still identifying as Black. So for the ones that are, it's cultural. Like, I would argue that at that point, you can definitely still see recognizable Afro features, but if you didn't know you were Black, they wouldn't be saying that they are. You know, if they are, it's because they know, because they're connected, because that's how they were raised, maybe even during segregation, or raised by parents who grew up during segregation, communities that are still very segregated. Like the same way two Black people who have trace amounts of Euro ancestry could come together to make a child who looks like they're very much of Euro descent, more than their parents. You could also have the same thing happen in reverse, where you have two white parents who come together and have a child that looks Blacker than their parents. But I highly doubt that child would identify as Black.